This episode is about my recent run-in with coffee creamer. Welcome to Confessions of a Binge Eater, the podcast helping women over 50 stop binge eating, feel in control around food, and lose weight naturally without ever needing another diet that makes you feel like a failure. I'm Tricia Nelson, a former binge eater and your host. Today I have a confession to make. A few weeks ago, I realized that I was in a fight with coffee creamer. Now, I realize that probably sounds funny. Of all things I could confess to struggling with, coffee creamer probably isn't what you'd expect me to confess to, but that's exactly why I wanted to share this story with you. Because if there's one thing I've learned after years of healing my relationship with food, is that recovery isn't about becoming immune to food. Recovery is about becoming honest with yourself about your relationship with food. It's about noticing when something has quietly shifted before it turns into a much bigger problem. It's the subtlety of a healing path. So this wasn't a binge, and it certainly wasn't some dramatic relapse. I didn't wake up one morning and suddenly gain 5 pounds. This was much sneakier than that. And honestly, that's exactly how emotional eating often works. It rarely comes crashing through the front door. More often, it quietly slips in through a side window while we're busy living our lives. Ooh, that's what happened. Now, you might have listened to my recent episode 599, and I talked about 2 questions I ask myself whenever I'm deciding whether a food is truly safe for me. I don't ask whether it's organic, keto, low carb, sugar-free even. But when somebody goes on social media and says it's healthy, instead, I ask myself just 2 questions. Do I have control? And are there consequences? Those 2 questions have served me incredibly well over the years because they force me to stop arguing with reality and simply look at what's actually happening. Well, recently, I apparently stopped asking those questions, and coffee creamer reminded me why they're so important. So here's what happened. I had a house guest that purchased this coffee creamer that was sugar-free. So of course I was interested and I tasted it, and it was sweetened with Splenda, which I normally consider pretty unhealthy and gross. But when I tried it, it was so good. The flavor was creme brulee, and it was made with real cream. And at first glance, it seemed harmless, no sugar, just creamer, and I like a little bit of milk in my coffee. But honestly, since it started tasting so good to me in my morning coffee, I'd think, oh, I can't wait to have that. And then I began to have just a little more each morning. And when it ran out, I went out and bought some more. Before long, something started happening. I wasn't really having coffee with a little bit of creamer. I was practically having creamer with a little bit of coffee. I'm joking, but the point is, I realized I was having coffee really as an excuse to have the creamer. So at no point did I say to myself, oh, I'm going to turn my morning coffee into dessert. That's not how these things happen. It happened one tiny decision at a time. One slightly bigger pour, one extra cup of coffee with this super yummy creamer in it. So it's one moment of thinking, what's the harm? And because it happened so gradually, I didn't notice it. I fooled myself that it wasn't a problem. And that's how so many of these things actually happen. So many bad habits develop. It happens one small compromise at a time, a little exception here and there, a little justification. And you know what I'm talking about, right? One handful, one extra bite, one extra splash. Then one day you realize you've arrived somewhere you never intended to be. And for me, that realization came when my pants got tight. And I saw photos of myself and I didn't like how full my face was. Now, before you think that this is really about weight, it isn't. The 5 or so pounds wasn't the biggest problem. It was simply information like a red flag. Uh-oh, danger, danger, Will Rogers. But it was mostly feedback. It was my body telling me that something had changed. And instead of getting upset or criticizing myself or asking, what's wrong with me? Those are the old days. I simply went back to 2 questions I talk about in episode 599. The first question was, do I really have control? If I was being completely honest, the answer was no. Even though I was measuring it, I was justifying measuring more than I had been allowing. Okay, so the amount I was measuring was increasing, and I wasn't pouring intentionally. I was just pouring according to what I wanted. And because it tasted so good, the amount kept getting bigger. That's not control, just to be clear. I mean, I wasn't binging on coffee creamer, of course, but recovery isn't only about avoiding binges. Recovery is also about noticing these little places where we slowly drift away from conscious choices and begin operating on autopilot. That's what was happening. So then I asked myself the second question, are there consequences, Tricia? Again, if I was honest, the answer was yes. Those extra calories from all that delicious real cream were adding up. They were going straight to my arse, and then I didn't like the consequences. Those calories quietly became extra pounds. My clothes felt tighter. My body felt heavier. I simply didn't like how I felt and looked. So those were consequences. And once I answered both those questions honestly, the decision became incredibly simple. Not that it was easy, but it was simple. The creamer wasn't a safe food for me anymore. And notice what I didn't ask. I didn't ask whether Splenda's healthy, because I knew it wasn't. I didn't ask whether dairy is inflammatory, because for me, it usually is. I didn't ask whether coffee creamer fits into someone's nutrition plan or try to look up on chat to see if they can justify it for me. The question isn't whether a food is objectively good or objectively bad. The question is whether it's good for you. Can you stay in control around it? And does it create consequences in your life? If you're honest, that's an important caveat. Those are the questions that matter. One of the biggest lessons I've learned over many years of recovery is that a food doesn't have to be cake to become unsafe. Sometimes it's peanut butter. Or it's granola. That's true for me. Sometimes it's trail mix. Sometimes it's protein bars. Name your thing. Sometimes it's healthy ice cream. And apparently, sometimes it's coffee creamer. That's why I always tell my clients there isn't one universal list of good foods and bad foods that you, quote, can and can't have. There's only an honest relationship with yourself. And recovery is learning to tell yourself the truth. Sometimes a food that worked perfectly well for years suddenly stops working. Maybe you're under more stress. Maybe you're exhausted. Maybe you're grieving. Maybe your hormones have changed. Or maybe you've simply started using that food differently than you used to. You got a little too excited about it. It started being your crutch. That's exactly what happened to me. The creamer didn't suddenly become dangerous. I gradually changed the way I was using it. It stopped being something that flavored my coffee and quietly became something I looked forward to as a little emotional reward every morning. It was a little buffer between me and my life. And that can happen so fast and so easily. You don't even have to have some big emotional upset. It's easy for us to like the comfort we get from food, and it's easy for us to slip into leaning on it emotionally. And that's what I started doing because it was so good and it became a little treat. And I was off in the wrong direction in no time. So I made a simple decision. I poured the almost full bottle of creamer down the kitchen drain. not because I was punishing myself. I got rid of it because I listened to the information my own life and butt was giving me. And even though I'm slightly mad at myself for even letting myself get a little out of control with something, I probably shouldn't have even tasted it in the first place. That's the truth. I don't like Splenda. I don't need cream in my coffee, but I went there. So recovery isn't proving that you can eat everything. Recovery is protecting your peace. And I was quickly not feeling peaceful. So I needed to protect what I worked so hard to build. That's what I tell my clients you need. You need peace. It's not, should I eat this? Should I eat that? This is good. This is bad. It's what makes you feel peaceful. And when I'm looking forward to coffee because of the yummy coffee creamer, that coffee creamer is starting to own me. And that is not peaceful. I want to protect the life that I've worked so hard to build. So today, I'd love to leave you with the same two questions I asked myself. Is there a food in your life that you've stopped being completely honest about? Do you really have control? And are there consequences to your eating that or making room for it in your life? If you're willing to answer these questions honestly, they'll tell you far more than any diet ever could, because honesty, not perfection, is what keeps us free. So this is your chance to get honest with yourself. And now I understand you may not be able to pull yourself away from this food. That might take some additional work and some support from a community like Heal Your Hunger. So feel free to reach out if that's the case. But just asking yourself these questions is a great place to start. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this, I encourage you to take the quiz on my website, healyourhunger.com. It's a quiz that will help you determine if you're an emotional eater or a food addict or somewhere in between. It's a great place to start on your journey of overcoming emotional eating and letting go of anything that has been owning you lately. Perhaps it's coffee creamer. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you on the next episode.